This is the continuing series on making of Kyphi incense. And I wanted to add to my previous one. First, this one's going to be about the recipe itself. So those of you who are interested in the recipe will know what goes into it and my thoughts on some of the ingredients. You can buy Kyphi. I've seen it at different online stores. I think I've seen Kyphi oil in metaphysical shops. I don't know if I've ever seen Kyphi incense. But I don't think I've seen a lot of pellet incense in metaphysical stores, to tell you the truth. But I have seen it online. Where did I see it? I have my laptop in front of me for this video because I've got notes I really need to refer to. I saw it online at Sense of the Earth. They're great people to deal with, so definitely a good company to deal with. And I checked the ingredients that they list in it, and they're very different from the ones I use, and very different from anything I've ever known to be traditional Kyphi. Although, again, if something is heavy with resins, you could probably put it in the same family. And if it's made with a raisin, fig, or date and honey base, you might put it in the same family too. I've seen oils, and that would be, I guess, once again, using a lot of the resins that are in the Kyphi as I know it and making an oil out of it. I've never had any reason to use a Kyphi oil. To me, Kyphi is very much about being an incense and an offering made in that form. So I've never had the urge to have anything to do with a Kyphi oil. So making Kyphi, the recipe, that's what this video is really going to focus on for you all. Here's the shopping list. You saw me in the first video make the base, which is raisins, figs, or dates, a red wine, lotus oil, and a little bit of honey. The raisins, as I mentioned to you, the basic recipe that I will give you calls for 50 raisins, and if you're adjusting the up or down, wanting to make a small batch to test it out, or you want to make a larger batch, the ratio for the raisin date combination and the dry ingredients is 4 raisins for every tablespoon of dry ingredients. So you have to do some math if you're going to figure this out. I'll probably put a slide on here that has the actual recipe, so if you're trying to adjust it up or down, you've got something to go by. 50 raisins and a cup of finely chopped dates. You're seeing me make a bigger batch than this, but I'm keeping this ratio on this ingredient list for you all just in case you want to make this size. Red wine, enough to cover the raisins and dates or figs. A couple of drops of lotus oil. I mentioned in my other video that it's pricey, lotus oil is. You don't use much, and the only part of it you use is in the wet ingredients. You don't use it in the later mix, so if you buy an ounce jar, you're going to have plenty of lotus oil. You can also use ylang ylang. What you're looking for is something that is very deeply flowery, in that oily, heavy sense. But I found really that ylang ylang is as expensive as lotus oil, so I use the lotus oil. We covered that with wine. Just covering it. We're going to stir it every day. Add wine as we need to because it will absorb the fluid into the raisins and figs. And it keeps steeping in the days we're making the rest of the incense. The dry ingredients. And this is one of the reasons why I had thought I was going to be making it earlier this year, so I knew I had plenty of time for it to be seasoned and done by the solstice when I planned to be sharing it with others. And I had to wait till I had the money to get a couple of the ingredients that I didn't have. So, it's pricey, there is no doubt about it. It's a luxury. Almost like those ancient Egyptians that had to import it to make it feel that it was that much more valuable in their temple because it was exotic and rare. So anyway, the ingredients, the dry ingredients. Now this is using the ratio I gave you with the cup of figs or dates and the 50 raisins. 3 tablespoons of frankincense resin. Here's where I'm going to make some comments for you. We all love our frankincense, don't we? We love frankincense. The problem is, we're not the only ones that love frankincense. It's been used as temple incense for so long that it is now an endangered species. Yes, it's an endangered species. And if you're serious about making your incense, you do want to explore a couple of things in purchasing your sources. Is it organic, and is it endangered? When I was first making incense, we didn't worry about the organic because we really didn't have a concept in that time about the importance of organic crops. But we definitely had no concept of these crops being endangered. So this is part of incense making in this more modern time, this responsibility of thinking about this. There is a great website that I use as my resource for whether an ingredient for incense is endangered, and if there are several different kinds, as there are for frankincense. One kind may be more endangered than another. It's incense-making.com. I love that website for giving good advice on what is endangered or becoming endangered amongst the sources we traditionally use for our incenses. And that site recommended that there are less endangered species that the frankincense resin comes from. They're a little bit hard to find and they're more expensive. We all have to make our own decisions then. What are we going to get in the way of frankincense resin? 3 tablespoons of resin is what we need for the basic recipe for this. I'm making much more. We need 2 tablespoons of myrrh resin, 1 tablespoon of juniper berries, 1 tablespoon of sandalwood. See, this is a pretty small batch, so you're going to see that I'm going to be using a lot more than this. I use red sandalwood because sandalwood is amongst the endangered species, and red sandalwood, which is not on the endangered species list at the moment at least, is a much better choice to use for that. This recipe calls, as do many of our old temple forms of incense, calls for storax, a tablespoon of storax. Not me. Storax is extremely endangered. You can replace storax with one of 2 things, benzoin or American sweet gum, and I have done it with both, and they both feel and bring on the same kind of energy. So if you have a recipe for storax, feel free to use American sweet gum or benzoin. Both of them work fine. 1½ teaspoons. Mind you, this is a small recipe again, so it's a half part. Let me do this by parts instead. It was 3 parts for the frankincense, 2 parts for the myrrh, a part for the juniper berries, a part for the sandalwood, a part for the storax, which I have replaced, in my case, with benzoin. 1½ teaspoons or a half part of copal. Copal I love. Oh, I love copal, but I will no longer buy it. Extremely endangered. Pinyon pine resin really is a wonderful replacement for that. I read it someplace, I tried it, and it works beautifully. So the recipe calls for a half a part of copal, and I use the pinyon pine resin. 1½ teaspoons or a half part of galangal root, 1½ teaspoons or a half part of cinnamon. And this should be something like cinnamon chips. It shouldn't be powdered cinnamon. All of these ingredients should be ingredients you have to spend some time with. Part of the meditative process for these, which you will see, is what it takes to grind some of these things down. 1½ teaspoon or a half part of cedar wood. And watch where your cedar choices are coming from. Some of them are endangered. There's plenty of places that they are not endangered. 1½ teaspoons or a half a part of orris root. A tablespoon or a part of dragon's blood resin, and 2 parts or 2 tablespoons of gum arabic. They are the ingredients, and I made some adjustments this year when I bought my ingredients to allow for the endangered species. I really recommend that you spend some time at incense-making.com. Very clearly lists so many of the most common ingredients that we use in our incenses, and lists, if they are endangered, how critical the endangered level is, and also let you know if there are species that are not endangered within that particular resin or botanical. Very helpful website. And if we're going to be using our incenses for spiritual reasons, we really do have to consider these are living beings of the earth that we are using, and they need to be respected, and these endangered species are something we need to be keeping in mind. I will end this video by adding a slide that's got these ingredients and the ratios for you. This time when I went to buy, I bought a lot of my things from Soma Luna. Good people to work with. I also like mountain rose herbs, but for some reason the few things I need to pick up to round out my supplies this time, I just found better prices, more options on where they were coming from. So if I wanted to stay away from the endangered species, a couple of these things, there were certain kinds, like the frankincense, there were certain kinds of frankincense that you could get that were less endangered than others. I'm not ready to give up frankincense yet, and I think I'm being very guilty about that at the moment, because it really is a highly endangered species. But I really enjoyed this time the things I had to get. I got what I needed, got more variety to pick from at Soma Luna. They really have expanded over the years their carrying of the supplies we need for incense. So there you have the ingredient list. And the next time I'm back with you will be when I add the first of the 13 dry ingredients. Every night I will be doing a dry ingredient and I will be meditating on it, and I will start then tomorrow night with the first ingredient. They are done in the order that they are listed, and there's a specific reason for everything being done the way that it is done, which I'll explain as we go along. The night by night ingredient additions won't be long videos. I'm not going to do that to you. Tomorrow night's will be a bit longer because I want to talk a little bit about the sacred vessel, which is the mortar, and then the pestle along with it, as part of the transformation of these herbs and botanicals into this sacred incense of Kyphi. Has to do with what we, partnering with our mortar and our pestle, make of them. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the mortar and pestle tomorrow night, including adding the first ingredient, which is frankincense. I wish you all mirth and reverence. Merry part. Here's a little addition just for the Ernie lovers. This is where I was sitting with my laptop in front of me, and did you hear the snores and snorts in the background? Those of you who like to find the Ernie in the picture? Yeah, this is where he was. Sound asleep, snoring away.